sign a waiver. Not responsible for you. Why?
Because she
Can do it herself?
was like, I need to go in the South.
So, you mean someplace outside Atlanta you're sending her to?
Well, yeah, she has to
You know,
go
other than,
back to Tampa.
right. Oh, well, what about like Augusta?
Oh, yeah, that's in my mindset of just 75 South.
Oh, okay. It's a wasteland. It's a wasteland. You get past the airport and then Franklin. It's like Virginia or something, you know? That's my cut. So, wow, it hurts. I mean, from here, from Athens, you go diagonally and you come out on 75 at Macon. It is horrific.
Southern Indiana.
No, it's awful.
They're from Southern Indiana.
Good, so let's talk about that. Terrific place to go.
Yeah.
Set adrift. What are you doing?
Oh, just playing with the pointer. And then the laser matches.
Don't play with the don't enter it.
Matches your PowerPoint.
Okay. last meeting. I'm on the hearings board now, so, but we're trying to get some review of demolition permits in the historic. I have 4 o'clock. Okay, I've got 4 o'clock. Everybody else on the same time zone? 4. It's 4 o'clock? Okay, we're gonna get started. I'm very impressed in how all the programs get started on time here. So I think that's a great thing. All right, name of the program, What to Make in My Makerspace, putting the laboratory back in the library. And I guess we'll introduce ourselves. I'm Sharon Bradley. I'm a special collections librarian at the University of Georgia, 2 hours east of here. And
my name is Allan Celik. I am the Instructional Technology Specialist at the Ruth Lilly Law Library in Indianapolis, Indiana.
So we did create a LibGuide for this presentation. So there is the URL there. So the slide presentation, part of it's already posted. We'll post the rest of it up there, along with some other resources that were developed as well. Just by way of disclaimer, did a very similar presentation at a SEAL SWAL meeting in Dallas in April, but had a different co-presenter then. So those resources are on there as well on what we're doing at UGA on the main campus in the science library with a makerspace. So did everybody get this written down okay? Alrighty. Oop, I'm going back. It's too fast. So most of you are going to recognize the name of the presentation as something that came from Christopher Columbus Langdell, the great legal philosopher, I suppose you might say, in our world, the man who was responsible basically for the case method of teaching, whether you like it or not. It was one of his things. Blind grading, very important in our world as well. He actually had noticed when he was at Harvard that the people who came from the more prominent families, bigger names, so to speak, tended to get better grades than people who might be on scholarship or working their way through school. So he developed that blind grading literally to stop that concept of you got a good grade because you had what you might say would be a good name, that sort of thing. And he very much believed in the notion of experimentation in the learning and research process, and he really did see the library as akin to a laboratory, like the scientist has his laboratory, and he saw that as the place to not only do research, but to learn and to experiment as well. And so I thought about that concept in making the title of my presentation. But keeping that in mind that it's obviously a different kind of experimentation from your scientists, but very much the notion of it's not all cut and dry. There's always perhaps something new to learn and discover as well. But why putting a law library, a makerspace in a law library? Generally, we see the trend is the libraries, public libraries having those makerspaces as well. And I just want to point out that 2010, the Fayetteville Free Library in New York, they are credited as the first library to have a makerspace, and had a very simple mission: make technology more accessible to the general public. Great mission. So could we make technology more accessible to our users, our students and our faculty, and maybe even a broader community as well? But what kind of technology might that be in a law school setting? 3D printers, they're really, really kind of cool, but you don't absolutely have to have one, but maybe that's the hook we use to get people into the law library setting as well. So I actually did a lot of reading on this. So I did the reading, you don't have to, because I was just really intrigued by the concept of what could we do with this notion of a makerspace in a law library. And could I make some arguments for having one? And I think I have, and I've sort of categorized them under 5 major points here. So my thought was, if you were approaching the dean or someone else who's a decision maker in your world, that you could have a list of points that you might bring up for them to consider the concept of a makerspace. The first being creativity and innovation. I don't think that most of us in this room are going to disagree that there is actually a little shortage of creative approaches in most of our teaching and learning. I think it's usually the library that are looking for those new approaches, new ways to do things, but sometimes bringing our faculty along with us is the tough part, and bringing in that element of creativity. Learning theorists actually talk about the importance of play in a learning environment. But in law schools, we've pretty much managed to suck out any sense of play or joy in the process itself. It really is all about the serious business of legal education and getting a job and paying off those loans. I don't know if any of you are familiar with an author, Cory Doctorow, but he wrote a book called Makers. And he talks about, or there's characters in the book, it's a fiction, but talk about unleashing the 5-year-old inside of us. And so I thought that that seemed like something that perhaps the library, along with our IT departments, could bring back into the law school as well. That concept of play could in turn lead to some real learning and some real brain cranking stuff, which might then lead to some innovation and creativity as well. It really is a process, learning and being inspired. Most of us, well, some of us perhaps, we put out games and puzzles and things like that during our finals periods as sort of stress busters. But how about we bump that up a little bit and make them a little bit more sophisticated, some 5-minute brain challenges, or even gaming between our students as well, with prizes, of course, we want to have that. And been to a couple of presentations with individuals from the Harvard Innovation Lab. So those of you who do not follow them, they have publications and blogs and all kinds of things about their activities. And I find them very inspiring as the reading about them and the things they're up to as well. So I very much encourage you to look at what the Innovation Lab is doing, because I think that, and maybe Jack might disagree with this, but I think there's a sense of play that goes on at the Harvard Innovation Lab. There must be, from the projects that they come up with. And
just to clarify, we're the Library Innovation Lab, and
right.
there's also the Harvard
Right.
Innovation Lab, which is the second.
Yes.
Probably is also awesome.
And I was specifically kind of focusing on the library one as well, because I'm a librarian. But the Harvard has, so they got lots going on at Harvard. But it is a concept that I think both of the innovation labs in the library, bigger campus, is you can tell there must be some funness that happens at some point in time in those institutions, and I think that leads to great projects on their part. So my thought was that perhaps the rest of us could get just a little bit of that magic as well, capture just a little bit of that 5-year-old. Collaboration and community, I think, are another themes of perhaps promoting or encouraging a makerspace in your library. And I put the word relevancy up there with a question mark because I really don't like that we still talk about the library being relevant. I mean, there are still webinars on the topic. Frankly, I don't think we've been more relevant. And I think all of us who are here and attending these programs are an indication of relevance and how we maintain what we do, that exciting aspect of the library and that sort of thing. But I think that we do need to take our ideas beyond the library, just to the school itself, down the hallway, across the walls, however you're laid out at your institution, but then also across the campus and even out into the broader community as well. Most law schools we do tend to be a little bit insular. I know we are at UGA because we are the industry in Athens, but it really is important that if we want to maintain our relevance, is that we start spreading our influence in a broader way. And I think that a makerspace could be one of those ways to do that. Particularly reaching out to a broader campus. Can we partner with other units on campus? Maybe we can provide the space and they provide equipment, or vice versa. Maybe they can provide the student workers that can help your users using the equipment and the materials in a makerspace as well. One of the pluses of an academic campus is there are no shortage of people with good ideas and lots of skills. Sometimes law schools and law libraries, we can be a little less welcoming than we might wish to a broader community as well. But a makerspace might be a way of being somewhat more welcoming and bringing in different kinds of people to our library. And what if all the people that come into your makerspace are not just law students, but people in engineering, landscape architecture, even art students? The world is becoming more multidisciplinary. And so I think that having our students have the opportunity to work with students in other disciplines would be very beneficial for them as well. And then, of course, just benefiting a broader community off campus. Can we come up with ideas to serve our own local communities as well? There we go. Technical literacy. We've all attended lots of programs here, and we've talked about our students and what they do and do not know, and how do we get them to understand these concepts? How do we get them to care about some of these concepts as well? And at this point in time, we're still not doing enough. It was in 2000, 16 years ago, that the ABA established its e-lawyering task force, and it's now part of the Law Practice Division. And the mission was to alert the profession to the challenges of practicing in an era of technological change, and to advance knowledge about how lawyers can both prosper and advance access to justice by leveraging new electronic tools and media. So 16 years ago they had this mission. At that point in time, they were recommending that law schools update their practice management classes to include legal technology courses, because they felt that that was important, that those classes needed to reflect the impact that the internet was going to have on law practice as well. But by 2014, the authors of an article on the ABA website found that only a very small number of schools had actually made sustained commitments to do what they'd been asked to do in 2000. And many institutions are kind of even neglecting that technology component. I know I'm at one of those institutions where it does not receive the attention that it should. Some of you are as well. So we are not moving as rapidly as the ABA said that we should have been moving. We have things like automation of routine tasks, and no lawyer wants to be replaced by technology, obviously. And I was at another session where we talked about, what lawyers could and could not do with artificial intelligence, what people still needed to do. But we've been automating legal tasks for a very long time, conducting legal research, been doing that for a very long time as well. The e-discovery tools that can go through millions or thousands of pages and find what we need. We've also been using redlining software for documents, all of that. So we've been automating tasks for quite some time now. But I think we often take that for granted because we don't have to concern ourselves with doing those anymore. But while there's been the ability to do these things for quite some time now, most of us would probably agree that our students really don't seem to be getting it. Simple tasks like creating a table of authorities or a table of contents, that's just kind of beyond their usual everyday. They ought to know how to do that, but they don't, even in 2016. The technical literacy also is important for them to practice in the best way possible, that they are going to need to learn about things like design, programming, video editing, book writing, website building, online portfolios, ebooks. All of these things are going to be part of their practice, and they need to be introduced to them now and have at least a basic understanding of how all those things work. They also need to have a better understanding about the communication tools between themselves, between courts, with their clients, all of those kind of things as well. And they are going to increasingly talk to other people that do know how to do these things, whether it's the IT folks, their other faculty's peers, vendors, even their own children. They need to understand those tools, not only in their personal life, but particularly in their practice. And the notion of privacy. I think that is probably, for my thinking, one of the biggest concerns that our students need to understand when they go out into practice is protecting the privacy of their clients, their work products, everything that goes on in their office, and I don't think they have a very good grasp on that at all. So, very important. There are those who argue that learning how to do things, just even simple coding, maybe using like a Raspberry Pi, those very simple tools, can help with analytical skills, not because you want to become a programmer, but because learning how to program simply makes your brain think in different ways and sees problems in different ways. And that might be a skill that our students could be missing or could use a little bit more of in their learning process. I think one of the things that a makerspace could also do is just that how things work kind of concept. Again, it goes back to your brain. When you start to, if you take apart something, you see connections. And sometimes those connections can lead you to thinking about something in a different way. It's that serendipity aspect that sometimes you get with a research problem if you're able to step away and look at it in a different light. But also our students are going to need to understand lots of these things as they go out into the world, just their future practice as well. Remember that Apple lawsuit where they were trying to break into that phone of the San Bernardino terrorists that, well, shouldn't a hacker just be able to do that? Well, that's the kind of thing our students need to understand why that wasn't all that easy, why it took a while to actually be able to do that. Understanding what's underneath stuff they see on the surface. And one of the reasons for doing that is the notion of taking ownership of all of the devices that we have. I'm a tiny bit of a conspiracy theorist sometimes, but the notion of, Skynet and how Skynet took over. Well, if we'd been paying attention and we knew how all these things worked, maybe Skynet wouldn't have taken over. So, and I'm being a little facetious there, but I think it is important in the future of understanding how it all works and how it is all connected. General pedagogical reasons. This is, and I think in some ways, probably the strongest argument that you might be able to take to your administration is how they learn and what they need to learn, and a makerspace could perhaps be an element in that whole process as well. Informal learning. We all know that we actually pick up a lot in our informal learning, in our loose networks of, kind of hanging out and talking about things or playing with things as well. I do want to make the point that a makerspace is different from hackerspaces. Makerspaces do, just the concept, tend to focus more on learning and education as opposed to the coding and programming that hackerspaces focus on as well. I did make a reference, I think, a little bit earlier about learning theory, but there are two prominent learning theories that I think are very supportive of makerspaces. One of those is the participatory culture, propounded by a man named Henry Jenkins, and it's described as it enables people to work collaboratively, generate and disseminate news, ideas, and creative works, and connect with people who share similar goals and interests. So, very rough, broad definition of the participatory culture as well. But one of the things I found in my reading that I thought fit very much within why we might want a makerspace in a law school is the use of the tools, particularly 3D printers, in biomedical settings. And I was particularly reading about on being able to recreate devices that are used in, implants and all kinds of medical treatment like that, and that our future lawyers, perhaps they're going to be patent attorneys, need to understand about those kind of medical devices and basically anything that someone invents as well. Or the notion that someone who has a personal injury claim and maybe making an argument about the defective nature of a medical device, that how much more effective it would be to have an actual 3D model of those devices for the attorneys to look at and to talk about and to show to the jury as well. And perhaps one of the things that we could do in a makerspace is talking about how you kind of do that, creating these devices, but also the notion of how do we then give them the information they need to authenticate those particular items, because they're still going to have to get it entered into evidence. And understanding how that thing was created is very much a part of being able to go through that authentication process of those particular devices. The other learning theory is called constructionism, again propounded by a man named Seymour Papert. And it's described as the process of creating which reinforces understanding of a concept. Students learn through participation in project-based learning, where they make connections between different ideas and areas of knowledge, facilitated by the teacher through coaching rather than using lectures or step-by-step guidance as well. And within the participatory culture, he divided it into different stages. He's got what he calls one-off activities. So maybe your makerspace is used for just individual workshops or even the technology petting zoo kinds of things. The stage 2 are the ongoing meetings that you can develop recurring programs. You have regular groups. Maybe this is where we have those certification programs that we can give to our students so that they have a baseline of knowledge. Stage 3 are the temporary tools and kits, those things that can be mobile and moved around. Stage 4 are what are referred to as clean labs. We have a dedicated space now. We have modest noise, and I love this part, mild venting of fumes. So, because when you're dealing with things like the 3D printers, they do sort of melt things, so you need to have that venting. And then stage 5 are the dirty labs, which can be louder and messier. So you can have a constructionism learning theory concept and have these different levels. You don't have to get right to that big dedicated space. There's other ways you can do this as well. Makerspaces also borrow from the tradition of our career technical educations. Our community colleges now are where our young people learn actual hands-on skills, learn how to actually do things. And so the makerspaces borrow from that tradition as well. I'm not a big fan of the flipping classroom. And I find I just don't quite, I just think it's overblown at this point in time. But if the notion of the flipping classroom is that we move the teacher away from the front of the room and we're delivering content in a different kind of way, then I think the makerspace fits in with that perfectly, because we are going to approach education in a very different manner as well. One of the things I read was that the librarian, who might be leading something going on in the makerspace, aims the student at the appropriate source of information. We don't tell them what it is, we just sort of point them in the general direction of that, and I love that concept. And another thing to think about with learning theory and all of that is that a makerspace might be the place where you can embrace lots of different ways of learning. And that really is kind of what the flipping classroom is supposed to help us with and that sort of stuff. So another tool that we can use. On the LibGuide, there is an article about Northwestern and their development of a new program in their school, a new curriculum that is focusing on technology training and things like that. So they're already putting it or making it one of the tracks that their LLM students can take as well. So I think we're going to see lots more of that going on. I did put a link to that article in the LibGuide. the goals of the library. I think a makerspace can very much fit into the things that we want to do in our library. We want to maintain our relevance, because we already are relevant, but I think it's, we should oftentimes, well, not often, but sometimes think about why we are here. Why are the librarians and the library where we are and what we're doing? I don't know if any of you are familiar with David Lanks, and he wrote The Atlas of New Librarianship. Anybody read that at all? I'd highly recommend it. He had a little webinar series as well. But he writes that librarianship was not founded on materials, but outcome and learning, and that we've become overly focused on the stuff. So maybe a makerspace is a mechanism that we can use to get back to focusing on outcome and learning. And I really do want to emphasize that my goal isn't to just have a makerspace. It's a tool. Now, it could be a big space, money-consuming tool, but still a tool as well. It can make the library more a place of creating than just accessing information, and letting the librarian become more of a facilitator and helping the students learn by doing. So I think it also might be a way of bringing in those people who do not normally come into the law library. And again, that's maybe we're having just a 3D printer. We'll bring in those people that wouldn't normally bother to cross the threshold. But also keeping the interest of the people who tend to be our regular users as well. They like to see something new, and I think putting in a makerspace may be the way to do that. I honestly believe that having a space, and whether you want to call it a makerspace, I'm using it more as a generic term. You might give it lots of other colorful or creative names as well. But I think it can have an ability to have a transformative effect on the library and letting us reach a little bit wider out into the world as well. There was an analogy that I read that I thought was very interesting. You can have a place that's more like a grocery store where people get little bits of the things that they need. Or you can have a space that's like a kitchen where they put together a final product. Or something like a dining room or a restaurant where you're reaching people beyond the library and people other than just your students or your users that are coming into the space as well. I also think it could, frankly, loosen up the library a little bit. I think we could all do with just a little zhuzhing up once in a while. And perhaps the makerspace is the way we might be able to do that as well. People like to take things apart, so maybe we give them the opportunity to do that. And when I kind of get down to the actual things that the students might do in the space, and some of these are more a little stream of consciousness on my part as well. But every makerspace needs to reflect the community in which it is placed. So every single one of them are going to be very, very different. And there's no required set of tools and services and programs and things like that. It needs to reflect what you want to do. I think we're kind of lucky because we are looking at a very specific group of students. We don't have to deal with young children or teenagers, which is perhaps a good thing. We're dealing with a fixed age group for the most part. We're dealing with faculty who are on a more focused interest track. We're not having to deal with people in humanities or STEM disciplines and physical education, all those other kinds of things. So I think we actually have a little bit easier in the audience that we're trying to reach. But lots of things they could be doing with just audio and video types of things, of learning how to record things and learning about the quality of recording for the purposes of witness statements. Also, again, understanding how that was done so they can authenticate it as well. Resizing of photos and digitizing things, video production, all of those sort of things that people kind of do, but putting it into the perspective of how this is going to fit into your practice, how this is going to fit into you being a litigator, or if you're going to work in wills and trusts and you've got the recorded will and all of those other kinds of things, understanding how that all works. I don't think our students do. Perhaps your Makerspace actually has a permanent video set up in it, and we can use it for the job interviews, video conferencing, interviewing witnesses as well, because just doing something on Skype isn't going to be good enough, particularly if it's something that you want to submit into court. What I think is that one of the most exciting things, and there's an article that came out of the Law Technology News, I put a link on the LibGuide as well, is the concept of modeling things. They talked about recreating a skull that was part of case. There were a couple of cases they talked about, but recreating the skulls that were used in these cases, and rather than having to have the original one brought into court, which can be kind of tricky when you're talking about a skull that's smashed up and that sort of thing, but recreating it with the 3D printers, but again, understanding how that's done so you can authenticate it for purposes of putting it into evidence as well. So very exciting stuff there. But using those printers or the 3D scanners and all of those kinds of equipment, I think that's probably the most exciting aspect of having a makerspace, but I think it's going to become the standard at some point down the road, not far down the road. Our students need to be prepared to know how to do that as well. Also, practice development, whether they go into a large law firm or even running their own practice as well, the skills that they need to develop to do those kind of things, they're not getting at this point in time. That could be doing things, learning how to use digitized media, creating their own websites, using apps appropriately, social media, not only for building their business, but again, from the standpoint of representing clients and protecting privacy and mining it for information in a case as well. Perhaps our makerspace could be offering professional grade office services like video conferencing or collaboration, and that's a service perhaps we can provide to some of our alums or local attorneys as well. So lots and lots of things to develop their practices that are really, really important. Where might we put all this stuff? I don't really know where you want to put it. I mean, we're all at a premium for space for the most part. I know I'm always harping about, let's use this space for something else or do that. But one of the ideas I had for my own institution is we actually have 2 courtrooms, a big fancy one, but we have a smaller one that is rarely ever used. And I thought, could I make an argument that we could put literally in the corner of that courtroom all of this stuff with this courtroom technology, things that we want our students to learn about. I think that's the best place to put if we want to train them on modeling and the 3D scanning and all those printers and all that sort of stuff, putting it into a courtroom and then them learning how to go about the process of authenticating all of that information. So, all right. Finally, selling the idea to your administration as well. Hopefully, I've given a list of lots of reasons to do this, and you can pick a few of them to talk to your administration about. Most of the time with our administration, though, it really, getting back to measurable outcomes, you know, how is this going to benefit the students or the faculty? For the faculty, often it's about their productivity. So if we're getting them to learn how to collaborate with colleagues in the makerspace, holding classes remotely so they don't have to cancel class. That's always a big deal, canceling a class because it has to be rescheduled. Or even appearing remotely at a conference so they don't have to lose time from work. Sometimes you do want to travel, sometimes you do not. But I think our faculty could benefit from learning those as well. And also the makerspace could become where we help them learn about distance education issues. UGA is just getting into distance education. We're offering our first classes this summer. So our faculty need some help with that. Maybe the makerspace is where they can learn about that in a safe environment for them. But also helping our faculty and students and administration as well, keeping up with technology and the changes and things like that. Putting it into maybe a fun environment like your makerspace might be a better way to do that, or introducing that information to the law school community. And our clinics. How about giving, if you've got a clinic that does a lot of business support or entrepreneurship, the Makerspace is giving them a place to learn about those kinds of skills as well. And I also thought about the notion of, for the development people, or as we call it at UGA, the advancement office, could a Makerspace be a naming opportunity? I mean, they've named all the rooms here. So, or maybe they just buy us a big high-end computer or fancy schmancy scanner. So I think it's giving advancement. They always tell me, oh, well, you have to have a story. So if you can come up with a story on your Makerspace, then perhaps it becomes a funding opportunity as well. And then also career development and job placement for our students. Again, going back to that concept of certification programs and those kind of skills, that maybe the Makerspace can be used for that, and they can use that in their job applications. And we also perhaps could be presenting programs where our alums, maybe they're just a couple of years out of school, but coming back for additional training, or we even do things remotely with them to keep them in the loop. That sort of stuff. And maybe another way of providing CLEs and doing that. So lots of different things I think could be coming out of Makerspaces. And hopefully, you know, you thought of a couple of ideas on your own to do that as well. I'm actually going to not spend any time on talking about Makerspaces in the law. There's a few programs out there right now. It's not really a problem, okay? Most of the time, librarians, we overestimate the legal problems that we have. You know, you have a printer that might be hot, so, you know, don't get too close. But most of the time, there shouldn't be that many legal problems, but we won't go into that as well. So, all right, I will stop chattering and let Allan tell you about his space.
Thank you. Okay, so my name is Allan. I'm at the Indiana University. I told you this earlier. But one interesting thing that happened, Sharon happened to be working on this project while our law school was kind of in the middle of, we're trying to build a collaborative learning space. I say makerspaces and collaborative learning spaces. I kind of use those terms interchangeably. Well, my background's in K-12 education. I have little to no, getting to know legal education, but still at times some things get said to me and it sounds like Pokemon, like names of Pokemon characters. So things like that. But with collaborative learning spaces or makerspaces, I can think of 5 great reasons for you to have them in your law library in particular. But theoretically, this square patch of carpet here could be your collaborative learning space or your makerspace. I taught a couple years of educational psychology where I had students just get together in a group of 5, you know, in a 40-person class. It was kind of a big auditorium, but they got on the floor and they gave me 4 different examples of this one term for psychology. And they got on the floor and we got these large pieces of paper and they produced an artifact, a learning artifact with their group, and a lot of them were really good. I had one stuck outside my little office when I was a graduate assistant. So yeah, it was kind of fun. So back to my good reasons for the library. Number 1, you have access to instructional technology staff. For me, I am based in our library, and we have other people in the library that do instructional technology related things, and it's just a really good idea for me. Students have access to research and instructional librarians. At McKinney, we have 2 librarians that happen to be pretty technologically savvy and teach legal research and are looking for ways to integrate something like this into their instruction. Security, you have, most of the time, people are in the library at all times. You know, you have students. I've noticed that students live in the law library. I'm from this little school in Valdosta, Georgia, and I never knew students to live in libraries. But sure enough, like these corrals become apartments, and you have somebody in that space all the time. Access to the physical collection, that's a good reason, I thought. And many times the IT director is the library's director. This is what I've heard. And so you have administration, you have staff, faculty, and the collection all in one space surrounding the space that makes it more accessible and people know what's going on. Okay, and some questions. Oops. Questions that I kind of hope to answer. What's the value of it in the law library? Sharon kind of addressed a lot of those. How does this fit in an area that mainly occupies books and research? These aren't traditionally, these very collaborative, interactive activities that students do. I feel like there's always going to be an element of reading, writing in law. It's just the way it is, because a lot of law students get out of law school and they don't really go to court. What is a collaborative learning space? I went over that. And one big thing is, what idea does any given professor of law have about inquiry-based instruction? That's another buzzword I'm sure you guys have heard, is experimentation and inquiry-based instruction. But in our library, we had a grant from our Centers for Teaching and Learning. It's kind of like we had a division of e-learning at my other school that I worked at, and then they happened to be had a pot of money, and we applied for a grant and got it. And now we're going to take this, what looks to be a seminar room, and turn it into a collaborative learning space. It used to be this really nice computer lab, but then it got remodeled, and it was a seminar room, and right now it's just kind of housing this furniture. But we're trying to get it to look something more like a real-life thing of what's on the left here. All these modular pieces of furniture that students can sit at and work with other people and work on work on their devices, work on a legal research project together at the discretion of the instructor, and really just with the collaborative piece to it. They are kind of running past these ideas with each other and getting feedback from their peers before they go before the teacher and submit the term paper or the whichever assignment they're given. And the collaborative learning space is kind of like a manifestation of what collaboration is. Like, for instance, this MacBook at the front of the room is not built to be connected to anything. It's made for networking. Like, for instance, if you were to work on a Google Doc with a group of other, let's say, for instance, if you gave an assignment to a group of students and had them work on a document, a brief, or anything with another group of people to show them how they would do that at a firm, it's highly unlikely they would be switching thumb drives. They'd be working on, either your university's collaborative cloud platform, whether it's Box or Microsoft OneDrive for Business, and it's just that physical manifestation. And this is like the classroom version of that. Okay. So, how the library can leverage this is that we can, like Sharon said, stay more relevant. When I originally did this presentation in front of some of my peers at McKinney, they were like, well, are you saying the library is irrelevant? Are you saying legal instruction is irrelevant? And I'm like, no. Don't take it that way. But, maintaining relevance and, offering more to your faculty, offering more to your students, because this thing like this space can just give you, an entirely new dimension for your courses. For instance, let's take legal writing, for example. I've heard that it's the class that could most probably benefit from this, because there's these monitors, these are, those things right down the end. I don't know if you guys have been in like the room 200 something, where they have the monitors in the back. And basically what that is made for is just for students to, one student can pop what they're looking at on the screen. And I'm sure some of you went to like the Apple TV demonstration yesterday. And it's the same concept, just students can, come sit with their peers and share what they're working on, put it up on the screen. The teacher, the instructor, doesn't really have a place at the front of the room. Most of the time they're just kind of buzzing about facilitating instruction, and the student, the instructor can look at what they're working on this humongous monitor and give them feedback. That's formative assessment. It really is just this informal moment of instruction where you're with the students almost candidly, just walking by, looking at what they're working on, and it's a big screen, so you could say, okay, so you need this in the citation, or, yeah. Okay, any questions before I move on? I feel like I'm kind of moving kind of fast. No, nothing?
Just ask one quick question.
Yeah.
Are you focusing primarily on sort of digital, or is there any physical?
There can be a physical aspect to it. The giant Post-it notes are very effective. I like the giant Post-it notes. So, it's all anything. It can be physical or digital that gives students an opportunity to express their understanding. Something.
I think he was mentioning like your new space.
Oh.
Is really much more about the digital.
Yeah. We're pretty much going for the digital end of things. We had a very progressive faculty member that vouched for it. So.
But that doesn't mean you can't drag in a big tub of Legos. Doesn't everyone love to play with Legos?
Yeah.
I have this theory: if people are playing with Legos and you're trying to talk about rule against perpetuities, I think it would sink in. But
Great prototyping and modeling material.
Yeah, I mean, I could see structuring a legal argument with Legos. Because, if you had words and stuff on the sides of the Legos, because we're doing that's a tangent, sorry. Continue. So, but yeah, this kind of, the modular nature of the collaborative learning space really makes it more and more practical, because, if you don't want the digital thing, then you can just turn, well, my TV's gone. I had a TV here. But then,
This is your Makerspace, not a model.
this is another university. I should have put a citation. But it's the Makerspace. Like I said, they're very kind of wing it kind of things. And I have some more examples later. It's not meant to be as straightforward. Like physically, I can look at this classroom and see it's just made for students to sit forward and look, because there's these big 2x4s on the front of the tables, and I'm sure that lets up. But you guys are kicking it right now. But yeah, so just any place for students to just get together and work on a project or structure an argument. Okay, losing myself. And again, this is all grounded in what Sharon mentioned about experimentation, students running through all these ideas with themselves and their peers, modeling their thinking process with their peers before they submit to their instructor. And me being from K-12, we make a big deal about students can't really express themselves unless they feel like they're safe. They feel like they're in a safe space where they can just articulate their ideas without that much fear of failure. Sure, we've heard people. Some of the keynote speakers were talking about how law school should be open, and then let students make the decision to get out on their own. But they will experience failure, certainly, some of them. But, you know, let them not be so afraid of it. Let them come in and run things through their peers before, you know, giving a lot of feedback. Okay, so, and this is at Stanford University. You can see kind of, you know, it's really modular. It's just, it's a foldable whiteboard that folds, and students can, you know, position benches if they want just, you know, if they want just a big white wall, sure, it's a big white wall. But if they want to kind of section out their ideas on these different panels, then they just, looks like they just fold them and then just wrap the benches around. And it's, I just get more and more when I see these, it's just like they're just turning into Starbucks. But, you know, sure, Starbucks, they're everywhere. And even these little hard mats here are for putting a laptop on. If you don't want to sit down, just put a laptop there, sit on the floor. You'd be surprised. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. And this is a draft. This is what some of what we actually have at Indiana University. You notice, okay, you'll notice that we still have this you know, kind of high school computer lab thing going on, where on one side, sure, everyone comes and sits down at their workspace, but we also have a software program that lets students connect their laptop or iPad or whatnot and throw it up on this monitor here. And then when students come to share their ideas or whatnot, they just flip it up on the big monitor and show it to the entire class. We also have these large whiteboards between the monitors for students to write their ideas, whatnot. And this is an example from Stonehill College. These tables can be moved, they can be pulled out, they can be pulled together. You have another large screen here for sharing to the entire class. And it looks like they still have individual monitors at each table. And this is at Michigan State. Indiana University, we kind of look at what Michigan State and what University of Michigan and Iowa do before we do it, and then it was really interesting. University of Iowa named their Makerspace initiative the Tile Initiative, and then we went right behind them and named ours like the Mosaic Initiative, which I thought was kind of but you know, it works. It's catching on. We're getting funding, so yeah. So this you know, multiple workstations. There's not really an instructor desk. There's rooms for AV equipment, but it's mainly just, it's made for collaboration. There are larger screens to show to the entire group, but it's still not a traditional Socratic, it's not made for the traditional Socratic dialogue. But in conclusion, I'm really excited to be in law libraries right now, in legal education. You know, just a year and a half ago, we hauled out like 30 50-foot long trailers full of books out of our library because we hadn't culled our collection in 20 years, so it needed to be done. So, you know, I got a little paranoid, but, you know, I was thinking like, you know, stuff like this makes me proud to be in the industry. So that's it for me. Again. Oh, and this is my box folder link if you want to the contents of the.
Let's put that on the LibGuide.
Yeah, we'll put it on LibGuide.
I do everything with LibGuides. I even did a program called How to Do Everything with LibGuides. Big LibGuides fan. And I want to ask a question. So, did anything come to anybody as I was rambling on of what you might think of doing in a makerspace? What would you like to see in your institution that you? And let's just call it a makerspace for lack of a better thing to call it. We would give it a much more clever title than that, of course. So anybody come up with some ideas that you thought were just brilliant?
I don't know ideas are brilliant, but
You'll be the judge of that, right?
but how do you differentiate the sort of, I guess, the space itself? Because it kind of seems to be like a multi-function. Sort of the process of getting people to use it.
And I'm not sure I would even differentiate that. I think you go back to what's gonna work best in your space. There is no one size fits all, there is no, literally, I think, a specific technical definition of a makerspace. Broad term. It is a space in which we focus on collaborative learning, hopefully creativity, of developing analytical skills, and growing in the technology as well, that kind of thing, so that it's the learning that I think is very multifaceted, not necessarily even the space itself.
Like, do we just put an empty space, or do we get a whole bunch of Play-Doh, or do we get like computers or Gino?
I don't know what the rest of you think. I mean, do we start with a 3D printer? Do we start with a Rubbermaid tub of Legos? What do we start? Yeah.
Start with capable trainers. It's actually really, really hard to find people. I mean, when you say people who have this idea that the Raspberry Pi is a little cheap on a Linux box, and I have really interested in diving into that beyond.
That's where you start, is can you bring in someone hired the Makerspace coordinator before they had the Makerspace, because knowledge to help them develop the space that would be appropriate for their situation as well. So that's probably the best answer.
One of the things that I've also
What a way to spend your life, huh? Yeah.
full story, and it seems like now there's so much is available in electronic dockets. Looking at those
Yeah. Well, and there were a couple of programs here. Couldn't one, I think Jack did on, again, that mining of the stuff. Our students need to kind of understand. He may put all the work into developing it, but then the students, how is it going to be useful? And again, your makerspace, maybe you focus on that, of the big data, the big, the question, all that kind of stuff. So perhaps that's an element that you put into your makerspace as well. So I think that's a great use. Anybody have any questions or
Follow up
observations?
on the stuff. For support for that.
I think that's a big part of having a collaborative space, is really reaching out to your campus. Those of us who are on big campuses, really, we've been so insular for so long, and we cannot exist that way anymore. We just can't. It's so important to reaching out and making those connections, and our students learning about other things as well. And the entrepreneurship question, yeah, a lot of our students want to go on to be entrepreneurs, but in addition to helping them with the development of the app, but also can we tie in them learning some of those business skills that they might need to know as an entrepreneur, protecting their patents, they're registering their design ideas and all of that kind of stuff. Can we help that process is one big package as part of our makerspace? And there are institutions out there that do have entrepreneurial kind of incubator type situations as well. So, yeah.
Look, how have you looked at all how these ideas?
Well, I haven't, because I don't have a so I have not.
We have
Oh, yeah.
an instructor that teaches something with our SPIA people, which is SPIA, which has to do with kind of like, what do you do if Al-Qaeda blows up Indianapolis? So she does that simulation where it's like everyone dresses up and everyone comes to all of her students come to the foyer area, and they all have like a debriefing, and they work with this other place on campus. And what I kind of envisioned with the law students would be just acting out things like client interviews. She's big on client interviews. So instead of having her, she actually filmed her administrative assistants, and come up with vignettes and things like that. So have the students do it in those spaces.
How do you get the buy-in from the faculty themselves? You don't have time for even the things that you.
Yeah, I've noticed that reaching my faculty is very difficult, and and that's not even for having collaborative activities. It's just their buy-in has to be just me sitting down one-on-one with them and explaining just how a discussion board on our course management system works. So I just have some really good ideas planned out, and so when they come to me and ask me how to do this, then I just give them run-throughs of how this could work.
See, I'm going to go the other direction and start with the dean. See, I'm really, tight with the dean right now. He's just loving me for some things I've done, so I'm going to play off that, that cachet I have right now. But it really does come back to stressing, I think, the pedagogical aspects of this, that what our students need to know when they go out into the world, and how this can help them learn that. And I think if you really focus on the pedagogical, and particularly the technology education, they have to know these things, and that obviously has to come from administration, that we're going to focus on these things, and maybe even starting off with something small of, maybe you can develop a 1-credit class that you can somehow tie in with, legal research program, something like that, and doing it that way, because they're not oftentimes going to see the benefits. So I think it's always back to our students need this so they can get jobs in the world. And that sounds so bottom line, kind of, but I guess that's really
The practice ready.
Yeah, there's that phrase.
Practice ready.
Okay. Any other questions or observations from anybody? Well, thank you so much. We really appreciate your attending. Thank you so much. All right, so we can close this. Let me hide the screen.
Just escaped it.
Never like to see the magic.
Are you done with this? Okay.
Yeah, I'm finished.
Say,
Wait a minute, okay, but I don't want to do, yeah, you can go, no, you, you can close that. You know what I wanted to do was put your link on the close. Need to say do?
yeah, we probably do, because
Because we want to put this one on, okay.
so it's right here.
But I have to print it as a PDF to put it on.
You say cancel, it's fine. I put some funny font on there and it didn't behave like I wanted it to.
What was that link that you had?
It's just
Or should I just put it under yours?
oh yeah.
Well, let's, well, you could just put your presentation in here if you'll take it home and PDF it and stick it in there. You know how to do that? Okay, and then that other link that you had, put that in there too.
Yeah. And that is the link to the PDF, so.
Oh, okay. Well, do whatever you think. So I think we're good about having to put anything in here. We're good?
They still don't know what they're going to do with it.
Do with what? Space?
Yeah.
No, but no.
I mean, they know what's going in there, but.
Well, but now you can maybe talk about some ideas of what they do when the students get in there. I mean, it's one thing to just have it, but you've got to do something when you get in there. So that's important. You've got to do something. Otherwise, why would they go in there? So,
Yeah, you're right. My Pokemon joke did not go well.
well, it wasn't a joke.
Oh, all right, it was true.
Well, you didn't say anything about LexisNexis. You just said things that sound like Pokemon. Okay, so you don't really need to save this because they probably clean up.
Yeah, they probably did. They're probably automatically.
So you'll put yours on there, so we're good. I'm not gonna say. actually just delete it.
Yeah, you can. I mean, they're probably going to delete it anyway. Oh, there it is on the left.
Recycle?
Yeah.